Peace to you, my friends, and amen. In this video, we're going to address the question, what is the ego? How does it relate to suffering? And what is the path to God as it relates to the suffering of the ego? So it's important to understand and first explain that the concept of the ego is very often misunderstood. The word itself is misunderstood. It often has misrepresentations. So at very first, we address what is the ego? What is this entity? What do we call the ego? What is this behavior that's exhibited by human beings that is referred to as ego? So the ego is, in its most simplistic form, let's just call it suffering. It's suffering in the present moment. This word has gone by many other names, such as fear, evil, separation, untruth, or selfishness. All these things are a manifestation of the ego. So the ego is suffering in the present moment. It's an entity of negativity that seeks to bring pain into the present moment, to destroy salvation for itself and to destroy salvation for others. And the destruction of salvation of others would be an example of what you would call judgment. So the ego is an entity that inflicts pain. It inflicts pain upon itself and it inflicts pain upon others. And pain in the present moment is orthogonal to the concept of salvation. So salvation cannot occur in the presence of the ego. The ego must be absent for salvation or the perpetually happy state, the state of enlightenment or Christ consciousness or God consciousness, whatever you want to call it, to manifest. So the ego is not defined, the ego is not this. The ego is not defined by a sense of happiness and grandeur of living an authentic life in God. So sometimes people would look at a successful person and say, oh, that this person is egotistical. Look how happy they are. They drive a sports car and they live in a mansion. Well, the thing is that that person may be egotistical or may not be egotistical. The presence or absence of affluence or grandeur within their being is not necessarily the presence of ego. Ego has an attachment to those things. So the ego would say, I can't be happy unless I have a sports car, or I can't be happy unless I'm the captain of the soccer team or the football team. The enlightened being can take those roles. This is fine. This is fine to take a role of grandeur in your life, or to be a professional musician and have thousands of adoring fans. It's how you associate with it is the nature of the ego. The ego requires that sense of gratification to be whole, to be complete, and if those things are absent, then the ego falls into a state of despair. The egoless state is one where success, yes, success can happen in your life, success can happen in the world, but you don't have a requirement for these things. You don't have an association with these things. So if you take those things away, you're exactly the same. You're very happy in front of a crowd of 100,000 adoring fans, and you're happy simply walking barefoot alone in the woods. It doesn't make any difference to the enlightened being because there's no attachment to these things. So on the ego of suffering, what does this mean? Well, suffering comes in so many varieties, so many forms to be accounted for in a brief sharing like this. But let's just explore a few aspects of this nature. So the ego very often attempts to judge the present moment, to say, this moment is lacking something, that I can't be happy, I can't be in the state of salvation in this moment because I don't have something, I don't have a sports car, or I don't have 1,000 or 100,000 adoring fans. Or the ego also is very often in judgment of others, so it'll say, this person is making me unhappy, this person is bothering me in some way. The egoless being, the enlightened being, is one of total acceptance of others. So for example, an enlightened person isn't bothered by the habits of other people, isn't bothered by their lifestyle choices, isn't angry at other people for how they live their lives. The enlightened being simply allows people to live their lives the way they're meant to live it, without judgment, without trying to confine them in any way. It's only the ego that tries to judge and confine. It's important to understand about the judgment of others that to judge another person, to judge another, especially another human being, and human beings have the greatest capacity for enlightenment and to live in the most beautiful utopian world. But to judge another person is actually to judge God. It's actually to judge God's path for that person. So the enlightened being is one of non-judgment and of total acceptance of others. If a person were to judge someone based on their past or on even their present behavior, this is to say that you think, or the ego would think, that it's better than somebody else, that this person should live their life the way that you would want them to live it. It's only the ego that does this. The enlightened being simply accepts. The enlightened being can be a guide and to say, this behavior is godly behavior or this behavior is not godly behavior. But whether or not the unenlightened being chooses to accept that information, that piece of wisdom, is completely irrelevant to the enlightened being. The enlightened being simply offers the truth, and whether it's accepted or rejected is irrelevant to the enlightened person. However, the feeling behind the words, behind offering something like that, is what's important. If there's suffering behind it, if it's to say, this person's behavior I find objectionable in some way, this is the nature of the ego, to find fault in others, to find wrong in others. So when someone enters the enlightened state, or the state of Christ consciousness, or God consciousness, or samadhi, or satori, there are many words for this, it's the egoless state. So there's a state of total non-attachment, there's a state of total acceptance and non-judgment of this very moment, of any person. So you simply accept, you're in a state of total acceptance and joy of the present moment. And even if you listen to somebody singing out of tune, you hear, oh, you know, how beautiful that person is trying to make a beautiful offering of song. You don't judge it to say that person sucks. This person is hurting my ears. It's a state of total acceptance of other beings and their own offerings in the world. So you don't have any attachment or expectations of others. So when you begin to practice this state of total acceptance, of finding the love in every moment, of total happiness and joy, you begin to become closer and closer and closer to the enlightened state. And the egoless state, the one of total acceptance and total joy, is where you find God. And that is the nature of the path to enlightenment, the path to Christ consciousness, and the path to the egoless state. So I hope you enjoy this offering of a description of what is the ego and how does it relate to suffering and the path to the divine. So I say to you, amen, amen, amen. I love you, I love you, I love you, my dear friends. Have a beautiful day, evening, night, morning, wherever you are in the world. God bless you.